I would like to start by acknowledging the Minister of Economy. I also like to acknowledge the Secretary of State of Health for being here. Of course, Pedro, that has been supporting my journey for the last 20 years. Pedro always believed in dreamers, and I really am thankful to him. Daniel Traça, because he's a very special dean, and I strongly believe he's a visionary. I'd like to also acknowledge everybody that was involved in the organization of the conference, namely our research office. I also, of course, Carlos, that got injured during the conference, Deborah, and Luis, that is somewhere around dealing with the media. So I'm going to speak about the VCW in general terms, and then, as you could see, we have a very strong panel from people that are applying the VCW in different schools of Nova, as well as different companies. So I'm going to just start by explaining what is the VCW about and a little bit of the story of the VCW. So basically, the VCW is a new problem-solving tool. All of you will receive a paper by email once we are done with the conference, and once we had time to relax a bit. It took some time to organize all this, so I would say within the next week, okay, you're going to receive this paper by email. And in this paper, you have two frameworks. Basically, the frameworks are Diana and Tiago. As you can see, this is Diana, and the one down there is Tiago. As Pedro was saying at the beginning, I was supposed to introduce Diana and Tiago, but for those of you that are Portuguese, probably already guessed that Diana is my daughter and Tiago is my son, okay? But when you read the paper, you're going to see it makes sense, okay? Because I will say they are my sources of inspiration. So the value creation wheel results from 20 years of research that I will say different parts of the puzzle were published in many different referee journals across the world, and of course in collaboration with many different schools across the world, some of them Portuguese, some of them from abroad. Luckily, through this journey, it had a lot of media impact, and of course this helped to raise awareness. As you know, when the media like the idea, it's much easier to spread the word of mouth rather than if we are trying to do all the job by ourselves. So what is the VCW about? Basically, the VCW is about making the bridge between business and public policy makers, research, teaching, and consulting. When you read the paper, you're going to see that Diana is the theoretical framework and Tiago is the practical tool. If you go to our VCW channel, you're going to have all the videos online, okay? So you can spread the word, and you can always join the VCW wave, as somebody said before. And you're going to see a lot of events that we did in the past discussing about the VCW, because as Pedro mentioned before, this is a topic that crosses many, many different fields, from astronomy to tourism to services. So for each one of the fields that you are trying to apply the VCW, I'm sure you're going to be able to find videos on the channel. The VCW, of course, also results from 2 decades of R&D through partnerships with many companies around the world, from Fortune 500 to startups, many of them international, many of them Portuguese. And after a compilation of these, let's say, 20 years of research, I thought, okay, why not have now a tool that could be a problem-solving methodology to help organizations, to help people, to help society to solve the problems. And then Tiago appeared. I was working on Diana for many, many years, and then guess what? Tiago, one day, woke up in the morning, I looked to him and I said, probably it's time to have a practical framework. And here it is. What I'm going to introduce you now briefly is the practical framework. So what you do on, I will say, stage 0 is when you have a problem to solve. It doesn't matter if you are speaking about somebody unemployed in your family, if you are speaking about companies, if you are speaking about NGOs, if you are speaking about the government. The first step let's say stage 0 is to understand what is going on. Then we move to the next step. The next step basically is the question mark, which is what is the most important challenge that we want to solve? What is really the pain, the market pain? What is the problem? What is the market need? For example, we have a lot of people here in technology transfer, a lot of people from pure science. Very often, the pain that you have is how do we get funding? And you can apply a VCW. Or you might say, how do we get a new market application for our biotechnology? You can apply the VCW. So once you have the question very well defined, we move to the brainstorming stage. The brainstorming stage is very different from the one that is being used by traditional methodologies. So what VCW does is to split between the solutions and the filters. So we put, I will say, 100 people, it doesn't matter from where they come from, just coming up with solutions to solve the problem. So you can use all the different type of stakeholders from the organization, from internal to external stakeholders. And then you have a lot of people generating criteria to select the most important filters, the most important ideas. Then we move, if we look specifically to the brainstorming stage, what you're gonna have to do is you need to really be open to all the ideas that will appear. When we move to the filter stage, you are not expected to reject what I say the devil's advocate. You know, the devil's advocate, very often they give you the best ideas and they are telling you right at the beginning why the product will not work in 5 years' time. So you should definitely put them and include them in the development process. Once this is done, you take all the ideas that came from the previous stage to the board, all the solutions, you take all the filters that came from the previous stage to the board, and then the board decides a ranking of filters, a ranking of criteria, to decide which ideas should be implemented. Once we have this ranking of filters, we start with many potential solutions to solve a particular problem, and then we put filter 1, filter 2, filter 3, until we arrive to the final solution. For the final solution, you need to design a concept, a prototype, and then, of course, once you have the final solution, it's time to decide, shall we go for it, shall we kill it, or shall we go back on the VCW to think a little bit about this. Once this process is concluded, you sit down with the board of the company, for example, and then you decide, okay, I think we could sit down and transform the VCW into part of the innovation ecosystem of the company. Why not? So I'm going to give you some examples, very clear, so that you understand what I'm speaking about, okay? So to summarize, the VCW is a structured and flexible tool that helps to find the solutions with the biggest potentials for your problems, is a tool that helps to solve complex problems, allows to simultaneously look inside and outside the organization by involving both internal and external stakeholders, and facilitates both the generation of ideas and their selection criteria. I have here just a table as an example for you to understand the kind of industries you can apply to and the kind of problems you can try to solve. Of course, today we're going to speak mostly about healthcare. Since all the panel that comes after will give a lot of examples of applications of the VCW to biotechnology and healthcare, I'm going to just give you a brief introduction for you to understand how transversal is this tool across industries and across problem solving. So let's start with phase 1, phase 0. On phase 0, basically the idea is to understand what is the context of the firm. Are you going to solve problems at the board level, strategic business unit level, department level? Who are the key decision makers? Because you need to know right from the beginning who is going to take the final decision. Otherwise, there is no point to solve the problem. And then, what are the environmental and critical challenges to solve? For example, we started about 4 or 5 months ago a project with Jerónimo Martins Distribuição. We already have a video online that you can see it on the YouTube channel that tells a little bit about the VCW experience inside Jerónimo Martins Distribuição. We did another project with MasterCard that I'm also going to speak briefly. And of course, if you go online, you also can learn more about this process. Another project we did in partnership with Everis, that just did the presentation before, was with Casa da Moeda. And in this particular context, we really had interesting challenges, and the company liked so much the project that now has its own internal VCW, let's say its own internal Tiago, which is a kind of a chameleon framework adjusted to Casa da Moeda. So, to summarize, on this stage, you really have to understand what is going on, what is the company, and what is the market. Once we are done with this, it's time to raise the question. For example, what is the main challenge for the company? What is the main concern of the board? What is the main concern of the marketing director? For example, at Nova SPE, we did this already with 7 different directors, because, as you might imagine, each director has its own main concern. So, some examples. How to increase value for all stakeholders while cutting costs is a typical question. Which new product can we launch? When I say product, it can be a service, for example. How can we increase revenues using our existing technology? Then we move to the next stage. Once the problem is defined, it's time to come up with solutions. So let's not focus on the filters. Let's not focus on the things that kill the solutions. Let's focus 100% on the solutions. So for this, we need to have the open mode. There are no good or bad ideas. You need to use both and but. You have some innovation methodologies that say you are only allowed to use and. You should focus on the quantity of the ideas rather than the quality, because at this stage you still don't have the filters, so you don't know which ones will be the final filters, correct? And then you should avoid the not invented here syndrome. Very often what happens is when somebody is giving an idea, you say, oh, I don't like this one because it comes from that person, and vice versa. And probably that's the best idea. So what we did, for example, with Jerónimo Martins Distribuição, we use many people, both external and internal stakeholders, to come up with solutions for the specific problem of Jerónimo Martins Distribuição. In the case of Casa da Moeda that was told before, you're going to see the kind of experience that was generated there. Okay, so now we move to the filter stage. What we do on the filter stage is we try to understand what are the criteria that should be used to filter the ideas, because we're going to have 500 ideas. In some cases, we add more. Think about if we are using open innovation, very often you can have thousands and thousands of ideas to generate solutions, correct? So the idea here is you should play both the open and closed mode. And the idea is to multiply and refine the ideas all the time. And you need to compare all the ideas and try to understand why some people want to kill some ideas, why some people want to select other ideas. So here it's very critical to involve the devil's advocate, not only the angel's advocate. Very often in companies they try to kill the devil's advocate because then they say solutions do not come fast. But we strongly believe that devils, they play a major role in terms of idea generation and in terms of the generation of the filters. The Wall Street Journal thought the same, and in a work that I did together with Sarah Jan Mir about this particular topic, they did a lot of media coverage across the globe addressing this particular topic, which is why it's so important to involve the skeptical people in terms of idea generation, in terms of solving problems. So what has been done in this particular case at JMD was precisely that. Okay, in order to generate filters, the VCW team spoke with many different stakeholders, again, external and internal stakeholders inside the organization. This is the experience that we had at Casa da Moeda. this data is brought to the board. And the board then will decide which ones are the most important solutions, the ones that are really, really interesting to be analyzed, and then we'll say, okay, let's look to these filters. Of course, at this stage, the board will also generate new filters and will also generate new ideas. We'll create a ranking, and then we'll try to align these with the company, with the vision of the board. So this is the experience that was done that we had at Jerónimo Martins Distribuição, where all the ideas and filters were presented to the board. This is the experience we had at MasterCard, where all the ideas and filters were presented to the board. And as you can see, the board got really interesting and invested a lot of time in analyzing all the different solutions. And then this is the experience that we had at Casa da Moeda when the board was analyzing the solutions. Once we had this meeting with the board, it's time for the funnel. In the funnel, what we do is we pick all the ideas that survived the initial stage, we start applying the filters, and then you start knowing which ones are really the most interesting solutions. The more solutions you have at the beginning, the better. And the more involved the board is on ranking the filters, the better. In some companies, I had to have different meetings with the board because, for example, the CFO was not present or the CEO was not present and so on. So it's very important that the final decision, the filter stage, is decided by all the people that are the critical decision makers. Otherwise, we'll need to go back again in the VCW process. For example, in the case of MasterCard, we start with 55 solutions and we finish with 10 winning solutions, which is something really impressive. Some of these solutions were spoken via Skype with MasterCard across the board. If you look to Casa da Moeda, we start with 12 solutions after the meeting of the board, and we finish with 4 final solutions. So then it's time to operationalize, to conceptualize the solutions. There are different ways of doing that. For example, you can organize fairs, you can develop posters, prototypes, videos. For example, what we did at Casa da Moeda is we gave training to all the teams about the VCW process so that they were involved in the process. They developed their own pitches, their own presentations, and then on the final stage, it was important to decide go, no go, or shall we go back on the VCW. So at this stage, operation, basically what you need to do is you need to apply the business model, you need to apply the 3 M's, man, minute, and money, and then you need to think, if that is the issue, how to grow. If you decide to go ahead, of course you need to think that is not only about implementation, it's also about monitoring and control. For example, at Casa da Moeda, all the solutions that were presented went ahead, and the project went so well that guess what? Casa da Moeda decided to use the VCW that I developed in partnership with Everis to build a culture of problem solving, to industrialize innovation inside Casa da Moeda, and to build an innovation ecosystem that basically is solving problems all the time. So now you're going to have a team responsible for applying these inside there. As you see, there will be a governance model. And then the VCW will be used as a tool to bring the innovation partners on board. This is the VCW of Casa da Moeda, basically it's the Tiago that you have down here, but now customized to Casa da Moeda. And then, based on this, Casa da Moeda had a really interesting initiative, which was basically the Innovation Day. As you can see, the VCW is being used to support different initiatives inside YNCM. up to your imagination. Now the challenge I have for you, and you have till the end of the day to think, is which challenge do you want to solve? Now that you know the VCW, if you want to learn more about this, you can go to the VCW channel. So just explore, just learn more about VCW, and come back to me if you believe you have a problem that you want to solve, and I'll be more than happy to help you. Okay? Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure. Thank you.